Hello and welcome to the November Recreational Astronomy Night Meeting online edition of the RASC Toronto Centre. My name is Paul Markov, coming to you from Markham, Ontario. And other than introducing the speakers, I'm always on the lookout for more presentations. If you have a presentation in mind, please get in touch with me. We have openings for the December and later meetings. And just for your information, our meetings typically occur on the first Wednesday of each month. Before we start the presentations, I'd like to recognize our top-notch technical team comprised of Andrew and Betty Reed, Emma Seabrook, Ward Legros, and Daniel Cholucci. Thank you for making these online presentations possible for all of us. We have 3 presenters this evening as usual, and I expect we will be done around 9:30 p.m. The speakers for this evening are Denis Grey with The Sky This Month. Next will be Darren Hennig from the Winnipeg RASC Centre, Big Binoculars, Prepare to be Amazed. And then we have Brian Day from NASA, and he'll talk to us about NASA's Solar System Treks Data Visualization and Analysis Portals. Finally, Tom Luton, our president, will close the meeting with the announcements. And just a reminder that if you have any questions for our speakers, please enter them in the YouTube chat box, and Emma will ask the speakers your questions. And if you're attending our meeting for the first time, whether you're a member or not, please say hello through the messaging box as well. So I think we're all set to get the presentations going. I'll turn it over to Denis Grey with The Sky This Month.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Paul. I'm speaking to you tonight from downtown Toronto, home of world-famous light pollution and all kinds of other things. We've been enjoying a little bit of clear weather, and I'll be touching on that as we cover off some of the highlights of the sky this month today. Just in terms of tonight's agenda, we'll start with the big picture, as I like to, just to sort of give everybody a little bit of a overview where we're at, and then we're going to go through 4 weeks here in November. The sky this month actually overlaps pretty well the whole month of November, and our next recreational astronomy meeting is December 1st. So all the stuff we'll be talking about is happening this month, and we'll hopefully have some questions, and hopefully I'll have some answers for you at the end. So just in terms of the big picture, this map, which comes from moonwise.co.uk, shows us the entire sort of night sky starting in the west in the evening going all the way towards dawn. And it gives you an idea of kind of where we are in the overall picture here in terms of the sky. So you notice, first of all, the summer triangle is getting lower and lower in the sky. We're starting to say goodbye to the summer triangle, and about around midnight you'll see Orion rising, and then that's the time when the winter hexagon, that large, extremely large star pattern, starts to show up in our sky. All of the planets, with one notable exception, are in the evening sky. In other words, this is roughly where midnight shows up here. So all of the planets are here, with the exception of Mars, which is just coming around the sun. So it's just leaving superior conjunction, slowly starting to pull its way away from the sun and lining itself up for its next apparition, which will be in late 2022. So we can look forward to that. For those, I'm sure most of you have noticed that the days have been getting longer. And we're at the point in the year now, we're past the equinox. Things are starting to slow down as we get into December. Our night currently, or daylight, is down to 10 hours, which means that our nights, particularly sort of astronomical twilight, is up to about 11 hours per night. And as we get closer and closer to the solstice period, we'll see that time change a little bit. But you notice the difference between now and the difference, and sort of the December is not significant. So really the rapid change that we see around September is over now, and things now change sort of minute by minute as we go through the year. So lots of daytime or lots of nighttime to take advantage of this time of year. In terms of where we're at, looking and what we're able to see, in the fall, we're generally looking out away from the disk of the Milky Way. We're looking sort of below the galaxy. So the Milky Way is best seen in the summer when we're looking at the dense core of the Milky Way, and in the winter we see the outer part of the Milky Way. It's fainter, but still quite nice, especially on a dark night. And here we are in the fall, and we're looking away from the overall galaxy. So we're not seeing as much in terms of bright star clusters and other things like that, but there's still good things to see, and we'll be looking at it. So just in terms of what's going on, if we look towards the west around sunset, we'll see sort of the tail end of Sagittarius and the Milky Way going down. We see Jupiter and Saturn are heading towards the sunset there as well, and they'll be accelerating or appearing to accelerate as they get closer to the sun as the month goes on. We're saying goodbye to Hercules and some of the other spring constellations. So Arcturus in Bootes is almost gone, and that's the sunset view there. And in the morning sky, if we're looking in the morning, the spring constellations are coming up. So we're seeing things like Bootes and Leo, and the ecliptic in the spring is extremely high. This makes this time of year generally good time to see Mercury in the morning, and that's part of. I noticed that Ed T was out there spotting Mercury in the morning, and again, this is kind of why it's good, because Mercury gets further away from the horizon, which makes it more visible for us. Whereas when you're in, if we were trying to find Mercury here, the shallow angle that the ecliptic makes with things makes it very difficult to spot things that way. Now, of course, when we're looking at a sky chart like this, it's a bit of an idealized version of what you can see in the sky. But just to make it clear that I'm not overthinking this a little bit, we need to bear in mind the real situation that we're dealing with here in the Great Lakes Basin in southern Ontario. So this is a map from eclipsophile.com. Our friends from the Winnipeg Center who work with weather forecasting for eclipses and so forth have provided this handy dandy chart which shows sort of average cloud cover at night in November. And as you can see, we would, if you really want to get good views of the night sky, the place to be is kind of in northern Mexico or southern United States right now. The Great Lake is starting to get socked in, and judging by the color map there, it's kind of like 70 or 80% cloud. So what does that mean? It means that if it's clear, you should get out there, because you probably won't have that many evenings this month in order to enjoy the night sky. So that's my advice to everyone. So let's look ahead at the month. So first week here, November 3rd to 9th. So November, this initial week of the month is our new moon weekend. This is our best opportunity for deep sky observing and other activities like that. The moon won't be interfering in any significant way until at least the 9th. There is an opportunity. Venus is in the evening sky, and there will be a close approach of Venus and the crescent moon on November 7th. In fact, Venus will be occulted by the moon in parts of the world, not in Canada this time, but they should be pretty close if you're looking at it on November 7th and 8th. Standard time is going to be coming back on November 7th, so there will be a time change. This is the nice time change where you get an extra hour of sleep, and so you can take advantage of that. There's also a dwarf planet opportunity, Uranus, and ISS passes at this time of the year are available, and they are running in the morning up until November 11th, when they will cease for a period of time. So the minor dwarf planet opportunity is the good old dwarf planet Ceres. So Ceres is incredibly easy to spot right now. It's right beside Aldebaran, which is the eye of the bull in Taurus. So this is essentially the head of the bull here, the Hyades star cluster. And tonight, if you can get out, you'll find Ceres is a 7th magnitude speck right beside Aldebaran. So from a binocular trying to find this asteroid perspective, this is about as easy as it gets. This is shooting a fish in a barrel. Now, in terms of where it's going to be spending most of the month making its way through this very rich star field here in the Hyades. And so at any point in time, if you use your planetarium or star chart program, look for Ceres, you should be able to spot roughly where it is. And again, 7th magnitude is pretty easy to pull out. It reaches opposition at the end of the month, and it'll be at its brightest. Ceres, even though it's the largest asteroid, is not the brightest asteroid. That honor goes to Vesta, asteroid 4, but it is still relatively bright as these things go because it's almost 1,000 kilometers in diameter and earned the title of dwarf planet. The other opportunity that we have is Uranus. Uranus is actually at opposition right around now, magnitude 5.65. So if you had a really dark sky and you knew where to look, you would be able to see it without any optical aid whatsoever. It's in a pretty photogenic part of the sky between near the Pleiades, M45, and Taurus, so you know roughly where to look. So basically, if you can see M45 and or the Hyades, then you just have to go a little further west along the ecliptic there, and you should be able to spot Uranus. Uranus has a distinctive turquoise blue color, and it does show a discernible disk in most telescopes, particularly when you compare it with a star. So definitely worth getting out there and trying to see if you can spot Uranus this month. Next week following, November 10th to 16th. So the moon gets brighter and brighter, goes from first quarter up to waxing gibbous phase. The Lunar X is slated to be seen on the 11th, and so it should be pretty visible. We've also got an appulse of, or a grouping of the Moon, Saturn, and Jupiter to look forward to on the 10th. And for those of you that are interested in seeing the eclipsing binary algo, there's a good opportunity on November 14th, where it reaches its minimum locally here around 6:36 p.m. So if you get out around supper time, take a note of its brightness then, and then come back a few hours later around 9, you'll see it resume and return to its normal brightness as it leaves eclipse. Just in terms of that conjunction, or not a conjunction exactly, but a grouping of Jupiter, Saturn, and the Moon. They are roughly about 10 degrees or so apart. They're part. All of them are in the constellation Capricornus. So that's a nice bright star pattern towards the horizon, and it will make a nice viewing opportunity there. It's also an opportunity to check out some very bright double stars, for example, Algeti and Prima Giri, which are part of Capricornus and also really good in binoculars. So good opportunity to see that. And the moon will be quite young, so you should see a little bit of Earthshine there as well. And again, that is on the 10th of November. The 11th, Lunar X and the Lunar V are both expected to be visible along the terminator. So you can just see the little X here on this screen. It comes out well, and the V is also visible there. These are essentially tricks of the light, if you will, caused by specific craters and specific viewing angles that creates that illusion. And it's kind of cool because the Lunar X particularly sort of bleeds into the unlit portion of the moon and sort of stands out in a very, very visible way. November 17th to the 23rd, this is the time when the deep sky people put on their imaging filters and otherwise have to let it go for a bit as we hit the full moon around this period of time, and it moves towards waning gibbous over this period of time. So the moon is expected to be quite bright. The Leonids, which are a famously variable meteor shower, are not expected to be very impressive this year. They're supposed to be on the 17th. Obviously, with the nearly full moon, there's going to be extremely strong lunar interference. So if you are interested in trying to see them, if you get a clear a heads up that there's going to be some clear skies on the 18th, then pre-dawn might be a good opportunity to see if you can catch a few Leonids. And the ISS returns to Toronto's evening sky around the 17th, and there's some good passes expected around the 17th. Of course, the big highlight this month is there's a lunar eclipse. So the lunar eclipse is expected to happen on the 19th. Pretty well, we can count on it. It's one of those things, and I'm just going to go and open this link here. Come on, link. Hold on. Bing. All right. If I go here, there we go. That's better. Sorry about that. So we go in terms of this site here, timeanddate.com. I find it's really, really cool. And what this animation shows us is it shows us an animation of the entire event. So what happens is we have the Earth's penumbra, which is the outer shadow, starts to come in across the moon. The penumbra needs to kind of go almost halfway across in order for you to start seeing this subtle effect. But then when we hit the umbra, the real shadow, then it becomes quite noticeable. Now this is marked as a partial eclipse, so it's not quite complete. So you see that little bit there left over, that is what makes it a partial eclipse. But look how much eclipse we're getting. It's really, really a very, very deep partial eclipse. And you should certainly see a change in color, maybe a little bit of a diamond ring effect with that part of the moon that's going to be left outside of the Earth, out of the umbra. And then the whole show will be ending roughly around dawn on the following day. So we have a great opportunity to see the eclipse. And this is actually a treat for almost everyone across Canada, including our friends tonight from Winnipeg and so forth. And it's visible in the United States as well. So everybody on this call pretty well will be able to enjoy this when it comes up. Now, some of the things about this, of course, from Toronto, this is a morning event. 1 o'clock in the morning is when the early penumbral phase starts. And again, you won't see, pretty subtle, you don't see that very clearly or very obviously. The partial eclipse, when the moon starts to get that big bite out of it through the umbra, then that starts to be noticed around 2 o'clock. So if I were setting my alarm, I'd be setting it for like 1:45 in the morning or something. Maximum eclipse at 4 in the morning, and then the partial phase ends around 5:45 in the morning, by which time you can go and get your coffee. So that's the overall area there. And now one of the things to bear in mind is the altitude. So the maximum eclipse will be about 34 degrees up. It'll be over when it gets down to 15 degrees, and from Toronto, the whole event ends when it's at 3.4 degrees. By that point, we won't really see that you won't really see the difference, but the moon will be so close to the horizon, you won't be able to see it very well. So you make sure that you get out there early and don't leave it late. Now, one of the things that I noted about this is just in terms of what kind of where it's going to be. And our old friends here, M45 and the Hyades, are really quite close to where the moon is going to be during this eclipse. So during the period of the eclipse, the moon is just going to basically move a little bit along here. But with a wide field camera lens and a little bit of planning, I think there's a great opportunity here for a truly nice astrophoto with say a 24 or a 30 millimeter lens, and a little bit of preparation, especially if you get a nice foreground composition with these objects all together, could be quite nice. So I would encourage you. The nice thing about a lunar eclipse is it's a pretty slow moving event. You've got a fair bit of time there to work on getting your photo just right, and you can take your time and put that together, and maybe you'll have something worthy of putting in a calendar or something like that next year, or perhaps framing in your own living room. I wanted to just point out that we've got a great opportunity for a pretty good occultation coming up this month on the 19th of November as well. So Asteroid 2407 Hog will be occulted. It's going to be 57 degrees high in the east, which is pretty high, 11:30 at night, and a Friday. So all of those things are good attributes in an occultation. It's not a work night. It's fairly high up. The duration is about 2 seconds, and it's 10th magnitude, which makes it pretty bright as these things go. Just looking at some of the details on this. This is the asteroid here, this occultation. If you look at the online map here, the path is predicted to go pretty well straight over Toronto. So it's basically going to parallel the 401. That's the green line here. And the expected path of the asteroid, or the expected shadow of the asteroid, is between the two blue lines. So you can see almost everybody in the Greater Toronto area has got an opportunity to see this asteroid. Currently, we've got 4 observers who are planning to try and take in this event. If we look at some of the details in terms of where it is on the web here, if we look at the wide field of view, it's just, again, there's those Hyades again, and the Pleiades. So again, everything seems to be happening around there this month. And we have the constellation Auriga. So Beta Auriga is this bright star. That's the one that is in question. And so should be pretty easy to go to Beta Auriga and then just star hop your way to the occultation site. And you could even take this in with a pair of binoculars and see if you can spot it. So essentially the star in question is just a little bit away from Beta Auriga, halfway between here and this star over here. So I would encourage everybody who's interested to try and get out there and take it in. It could be a very good occultation. And just getting into the last week of the month here. So things start to return to darkness as the moon starts to move away. We've got Ceres reaches opposition, its brightest point. The ISS evening passes continue. And I wanted to mention too that there are sunspots again on the sun. Solar cycle 25 is underway. We're starting to get regular sunspots appearing. There were a couple just yesterday. So if it doesn't look good for observing at night, you could observe during the day if you're really interested in taking in the sun. One other thing I wanted to highlight was catching transits of ISS. I talked about this in my last presentation, but I thought it would be nice. I realized that the website has been updated, so I just wanted to sort of show you how this looks here. So you put in your location and everything. So this green marker here marks where I'm at. But what you can do here is you can click on this next button and see all of the ISS passes that are close to you over the period of the entire month. So this is showing me here that there's a solar transit predicted over Toronto, and on the center line it's going to look roughly like that. Here is a transit of the space station over the moon when it's at this phase, and I would need to drive up towards Lake Simcoe to see that one. Here is another transit again, roughly the same time of month, similar location, only closer to home, and another solar transit here across. Now, this site is providing transit information for both the Tiangong space station as well as ISS. So this is a Tiangong pass. This is an ISS pass. So both of those are worth seeing. And if you are observing either the moon or the sun with appropriate equipment, then you're able to spot these events. The space station takes less than a second or so to go across the face of this moon or the sun, but it's pretty obvious, and it's a pretty cool thing to see if you can catch it on its way. So that is catching an ISS transit. And just wrapping up a little bit here, so deep sky in November. I've covered off a number of things here, but I would be remiss in not mentioning that there are some nice good things to see in the deep sky. Chris Vaughn's article in Sky News for December and November has some great suggestions here for some deep sky objects that you can see that are not on the Messier list. So the Iris Nebula, Mu and Cepheus, the Herschel's Garnet Star, and also in Cepheus, the Pac-Man Nebula in Cassiopeia, and the double cluster, of course, in Perseus. All of these are not Messier objects, but all of them are worth seeing. And so with that, I'm just going to wrap up and see if there's any questions for the sky this month. as seen from Toronto.
Thank you so much, Dennis, for a great presentation covering a lot of topics. And let's go to Emma. Do we have any questions for Dennis?
Yes, we have one question coming in from Eric. Is Prima Gedi one of the star systems in the Dune movie?
I think it is. I think, isn't that the Harkonnen homeworld? Might be. Yeah. I'll have to read the book again.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No more questions?
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paul.
Good. Thank you, Dennis. Great job as usual. All right, so let's move on to our next speaker. And okay, sorry about that. Darren Hennig will talk to us about big binoculars. Prepare to be amazed. Take it away, Darren.
Thank you, Paul, and it's a true pleasure to be here tonight. This is my first time presenting with your RASC Toronto Center, one of the largest in Canada and most diverse, I'm sure. So just a little bit about me. I hail originally from Edmonton, and I've been doing primarily visual observing for coming up just shy of 5 decades, 50 years. I just did the math the other day. I'm in my mid-50s now. That either makes me older than dirt, depending on who you are, or still a young pup. So anyway, I've learned a lot, and I'm still learning, of course, but binoculars have always held a very, dear and near place in my heart, because you're observing the universe in a natural way. And, when we look at the sky, I know this is a little bit of a overkill here, but we're when we're doing visual astronomy, especially, we're able to utilize our senses, and it's not unlike going to a trip in some exotic place like Australia or South Africa or even Europe. I mean, you can read about it and watch all the presentations you want, but there's no substitute for actually getting out and doing it. So no disparagement to our fine astrophotographer crowd. You guys do a fantastic job with your images, but I think being able to touch the universe with our eyes and our senses really helps us connect a little bit more closely. And I think I wouldn't get much of a dispute there. And by the way, Dennis, thank you for the lead in, because you had a lot of binocular primers there. So this is going to be a lot of fun. I always like to beat up. I am full screen. Okay, what happened here? Hang on a sec here. Pardon, guys. Let me just go back to here. Is that better? Hang on a second here. My apologies, guys. This is my first time doing this. So, okay, let's try this again and go full screen again. My apologies. How's that? Is that better? F5? How about now?
I think he's doing a second screen there. Has he got 2 monitors?
I am. Like, I only have part of a thing showing, but is it?
You're showing the speaker view, not the presentation view. You need to switch.
Oh, my apologies. Okay, hang on a sec here. Like I said, so which one do you want me to go on? The presentation view, like this, and then do full screen this way? Okay, hang on, guys. Sorry about this. Let's go again. Is that better? Is this better now? Okay, perfect. Sorry about that, guys. All right, so when I do a binocular talk, I always like to beat up telescopes a little bit, unfortunately. So I always like to ask people, whether you're a new observer and looking at choosing a telescope, or maybe you happen to be even a more seasoned astronomer, and with the challenges we have on a day-to-day basis, sometimes we get narrow slivers of time to be able to actually look at the universe with family and work commitments and so on, especially post-COVID. Binoculars are a fantastic option to be able to get under the night sky and enjoy the universe in a quick glance. And big binoculars are no exception to that, because it literally takes less than 5 minutes with the appropriate mounting to be able to set up and go. Now, normally when I do a binocular talk, I get into all the parameters of like when I do an introduction to binocular talk, I talk about aperture and magnification and a whole bunch of other things. But tonight, the most important things to talk about here are exopupil and eye relief. And the reason for that is because you're using much higher magnifications than you do with your handheld smaller instruments. And exopupil, just to remind everybody, is the diameter of the cylinder or column of light that's entering your eye. And eye relief is the distance between your eye and the top surface of the ocular lens that actually provides the full field of view. Ideally, with a large pair, you want to be in the 16 to 22 millimeter, ideally, but certainly a little larger is okay as well, especially if you wear corrective lenses and require them in order to utilize both your eyes for observing through these instruments. Now, there's a little fallacy that I'm not going to get into in too much detail tonight, other than a lot of times people will get the largest pupil that they can get with their binocular. And just to remind people, exopupil is your objective diameter divided by magnification. This applies both to binoculars and telescopes. And you waste light if you don't have a fully dark adapted pupil. So as an example, with a large binocular pair, if I have a 20 by 80 pair as an example here, I divide 20 into 80 and I get 4 millimeters, which is well below what one would normally consider to be a fully dark adapted pupil. Now, the reason that this is important with a lot of instruments, including even the smaller ones, is we have a huge range of illumination conditions that we may employ our binoculars with. This marker here with 20 magnitudes per square arc second equates to 5.5 nelm, so a naked eye limiting magnitude of 5.5. And anything darker than that, we're starting to get into the regime where our pupil is opening up a lot larger, ideally. But there may be some dawn to dusk viewing, or we might be observing in an urban or suburban setting, maybe even a more populated rural setting. We may never get to that point. And that's wasted light if we use a 7 millimeter exopupil with our binoculars in general. Now, I'm going to add this here. Gary Saronic, this slide doesn't come from Gary's site, but Gary Saronic, one of our RASC members, has an excellent chapter on understanding binocular exopupils, where he compares 10 by 50s and 7 by 50 pairs. So I just put this up while I'm talking about the rest of this. But this is quite a typical plot that you'll see with a large population group with dark adapted pupil versus age. And you can see there's a huge scatter amongst the population. The only general trend you can see is that as you get into your middle teens, it kind of comes to an apex and then it starts to subside a little bit. The nice thing with a large pair of binoculars, like the example I gave earlier with a 4 millimeter exopupil, is that you actually accommodate probably 98% of the population well into their senior years. So this is a huge advantage with these instruments. There's another one I'll mention just shortly here. But before I get into that, it's about image scale and field of view with these instruments. If I zoom in to a coin, this would be a simulated binocular view, I guess, if you want to think of it that way, especially a higher powered one. I can actually identify the coin and see more grain detail in this wooden table. The nice thing is that I still retain the context of the object that I'm looking at. And there's countless tens of hundreds of objects in the night sky that benefit from this type of intermediate image scale. Whether you're using a wide field telescope or a big binocular, you get similar benefits, but the big binocular has some other advantages I'll talk about in a few minutes. If I zoom in further, of course, now I have to I mean, this is obviously a little extreme, but if I started backwards, you wouldn't even necessarily identify this as a coin, and you'd have to pan all the way around to get the context of the image. So this is a huge advantage with these larger instruments. Now, what is a big binocular? Typically 70 millimeters and up, I would say, tends to be where you would get the cusp of the big binocular regime. Often they employ low to medium powers as far as a telescopic view would be, and therefore they almost always have to be mounted, especially when you get much over 70 millimeters. They become sufficiently heavy that it's difficult to utilize them in a stable way without some sort of mounting assist. So that's sort of what we're talking about here. Some of the advantages with a big binocular, well, first of all, as I mentioned before, the Exo Pupil. For those of you that do wide field astrophotography, if you use a fast lens, you know this very well. As soon as you stop down a stop or two, you avoid a lot of the aberrations of the lens that would occur at the outer edges. And that's the same thing that happens here with these instruments. Because I'm typically less than 5 millimeters on average, I'm using the sharpest portion of my eye. So therefore, I get much more detail, less flaring, less other aberrations, and so on. Also, the fact that we have a stereoscopic 3D erect image view has huge implications as far as the ease of being able to interpret what we're seeing. We're basically extending our eyes into the cosmos with this. It's become an amplification of our two eyes. By employing more power, we get richer fields of view with more detail, again, tied in with the Exo Pupil. And there's a subtlety that I'll talk about in a few slides later about the image scales and why they're important. And the moon is an example, is a really good example where it looks bigger than life. And I've had countless members that have looked through my large pairs, and they kind of look at the moon and then they look away from the binocular and actually physically look at the moon and then back again. And they can't believe the amount of detail they see, even at something like 25 power. It's quite amazing. The moderate weights still allow them to be very portable. And quite frankly, they're just really a fantastic option to visual observing, especially if you're really passionate about learning the night sky and being able to extend what you already enjoy with smaller pairs. The big binoculars come in several different configurations. The most obvious that you see in many publications and advertisements are the Horos style type straight through binoculars. And these are basically the larger cousins to our smaller handheld pairs or smaller mountable pairs. This is the most affordable way to get into this type of binocular astronomy with larger instruments. They typically have a second hinge with a rail on it, and that helps stabilize both the barrels for, because you can imagine two 4-inch lenses weigh quite a bit, and it's kind of hard on that hinge at the backside to handle the whole load. It also allows you to balance it much better as well. Typically 100 millimeters is kind of the practical limit for mounting them on smaller mounts. And most of these will limit at about 110 millimeters. Anything larger than that, you're usually going to a different configuration. But it's, like I say, a very affordable way to go, and it allows a mixed range of observational possibilities. Besides astronomical, you can do terrestrial and look at airplanes, satellite passes, whatever. The other one is binocular telescope style, and this is a very elegant instrument. Costs a lot more, typically 2 to 3 times more than the straight through variant for the same aperture. One nice thing is that these do have 45 and 90 degree options for the observing angle. So they're almost like, really, they're basically a prismatic twin telescope in one body. The advantages here is that because you can employ multiple eyepieces, you can vary the magnification and field of view depending on the application of the instrument, or to widen the application of the instrument quite a bit. There are several ways to mount these. Most people are familiar with the parallelogram mount, and if you have something like a Farpoint Astro UBM mount, or even a Monster or HD Orion Paragon mount, you can usually mount a lot of these larger pairs on those as well. So if you already are using those for your smaller pairs, you should be able to. Just make sure that the load handling characteristics are enough to hold these binos in balance. You may have to up it a notch. Those that want to do tripod mounting, especially if you're employing mixed service, terrestrial and astronomical, let's say you have a cabin out at the lake and you want to look at sailboats and eagles nesting in the trees and so on, as well as looking at the stars, this may be a better option for you. And of course, the binocular telescopes typically are usually fork mounted for best results. One thing just that I want to note quickly is that the parallelogram or panning, like the like a video pan head, you have to have enough capacity to hold these instruments properly on them. If you under-spec them, you will have problems with stability, as well as you may actually end up running into a problem having the instrument stay steady. So it can be a real problem. Those more, let's say, viewers that have above average heights. You may even want to go over 2 meters, maybe 2.5 meters for fully extended binocular mount. And in that case, like for the tripod, because otherwise you'll be crouching down quite a bit. Definitely the tripod should have at least a 25-pound or larger load handling in order to be stable and safe to use. And bear in mind that if you're using a heavy-duty tripod with a parallelogram mount, you have to accommodate the counterweights as well. So just be mindful of that when you're doing that. Now, this is more of a tongue-in-cheek comment, but larger binoculars have the stigma of being up-close spy glasses. So if you happen to be observing in your backyard with your new large binocular, let's say after this talk you decide to get one, your neighbors may not be used to seeing it out there. So just be mindful of the fact that you might have to let people know, hey, I'm just looking at the stars. And it even has more of a stigma sometimes than a large telescope, trust me on this. So just be mindful of that. When we look at a simulated view, this is the kind of thing we're talking about that I mentioned earlier on the third or so slide that I started with. And these are views of M45, the Pleiades star cluster. And you can see with a smaller handheld pair or even a mounted small aperture pair, we have a generous field of view, still very lovely. But the problem is that it doesn't really frame an object like M45, the Pleiades, in the full field of view. As we go to something like a 20 by 80 pair as an example here, now I have a different context of the object. And bear in mind, because I'm using more magnification and aperture, I'm going to dig deeper into the sky. So I'm going to see dimmer stars surrounding the cluster, as well as tighter stars within the cluster. And star clusters are one of the few objects that really shine exceptionally well in binoculars in general. And especially when you get these larger instruments, it's just amazing how wonderful the views are and how much you can actually see. Now, one of the sad things with binoculars in general, and I'm just going to mention this briefly, but we tend to almost either make an apologetic type of approach, or sometimes we don't. You guys may be the exception. I noticed with the talk prior to this, you guys focus a lot on binocular astronomy. But if you aren't getting a pair that's at least in the $150 range, plus or minus a little bit, up to about $250, you really don't have a high quality binocular. Now, something is better than nothing. But it's very important that you get a good quality instrument and mount it to get the full advantage of the instrument. And once you start to get to that level, all of a sudden the sky opens up huge. And then, of course, if you kick it up a notch with larger instruments like the, say, a 70-80 or 100 millimeter pair, it's just absolutely amazing the amount of things that you can actually see. And if you look at this list here, other than maybe Pluto, everything else is pretty much available here. I mean, you've got literally tens of hundreds of objects that really benefit from this intermediate field of view. So this is just a few of the things that we're talking about here. I noticed that bright asteroids were brought up earlier, and Sirius would be a fantastic object to follow here if you already have a large binocular already. Daytime planetary observing, I'll mention a little bit more about that later, but it is quite a lot of fun. And even with a larger pair, even though the discs are fairly small, you can see in a 100 millimeter pair, as an example, like the primary bands of Jupiter, hints of other things. Plus, you can follow the Galilean satellites. There's a range of things that are really fun with planetary observing in general, but even daytime, it's a lot of fun. Occultations, again, I'll mention this in a little bit, but today I was witnessing from Winnipeg here, hot off the presses, the Mercury occultation of the moon with a 25 by 100 pair, and it was actually a lot of fun to do. I was able to work my, I work from home fortunately, but I was able to work my lunch hour, delay it a little so I could actually look at the occultation. A lot of fun. Lunar and solar observing eclipses, we have that one coming up in just under around 2 weeks, as mentioned previously. Fantastic instruments for looking at eclipses. In fact, especially with lunar eclipses, they actually benefit almost better with a larger pair of binoculars than some telescopic views because of the depth of colors as well as the field of view and looking at the change in the surrounding background as the moon gets covered. It's really quite neat. General lunar observing, I noticed that we were talking about the X and V earlier. With a larger pair, you can actually see these as long as you have decent eyesight. Star clusters, of course, shine with binoculars in general. Dark nebulae. I was out about a month ago with an 82 millimeter binocular telescope, an APM, and it was keeping up with a 120 millimeter wide field instrument that we had. And actually, a lot of people were saying, there was 4 of us, and most of them preferred the image in the 82 millimeter twin binocular telescope, and we were running about comparable powers. So it's really quite interesting. And then, of course, satellite passes. The nice thing is usually you're using an ALTAS mount or a parallelogram mount. You can follow those very easily. You just lead the satellite, and you can see these satellite passes very easily. Comets, we had Neowise last year. Fantastic instrument for that. So really, there's a ton of things that you can see in these instruments. And in some ways, they give a unique perspective to the universe that you don't actually have with a monocular view. I mentioned planetary observing. And just quickly, like Venus is coming around to its inferior conjunction later part of the year and into early next year. And being able to track, this is a typical view in like a 25 power instrument. You can actually see Venus as a disk all the time throughout its entire orbit. And obviously it's small at superior conjunction, but at inferior conjunction, it's amazing the amount of detail, not detail, but how large the object looks and the phase relationship as it passes through to a morning object in this case. You know, Vesta being a very bright asteroid, this was taken from a slide that I gave a couple of years ago, but it's illustrative. This is with a smaller aperture pair. This was in late September of 2018. At the time, Vesta was near opposition and it was proximal to Saturn. So within a half an hour of sunset, you could easily put Saturn just outside of the field of view and boom, there's Vesta. When I employ a larger instrument, I had to obviously star hop to, the star cluster that's now at about the 12 o'clock position first, and then drop it down. But it was very easy, and Vesta stood out very, very well. So you can do this kind of observational astronomy very easily with these instruments. It's a lot of fun. The moon and the sun, of course, are fantastic objects to look in these. And I will talk in a few slides later here about the 2-eye advantage. And the image scale that you see in solar and lunar observing is really quite profound because there's something going on with our eye-brain system that actually gives us a larger apparent scale of objects, especially as you get to the larger instruments. It's present in the smaller ones, but it's really profound in the larger ones. I witnessed today, this is borrowed actually from Sky Bob's site. He actually had a post in the Minnesota Star, I think, and I just grabbed this quickly to add in. I'll have to send Bob an email just to thank him, and I'm sure he'll give me permission to use it, but the occultation of Mercury with the moon, and I was actually able to see it in 25 by 100 binos. And what was really interesting was earlier part of the day, about 11:30, so the moon and Mercury were about maybe 170, 165 degrees true. They really stood out very well, and it was actually very easy to follow them all the way through this event. It's very tricky to do that with binoculars or even any optical instrument. You need to have shade. I happen to have a gazebo available to kind of shade me from the solar illumination, and that helped a lot. A lot of people ask how deep these dig, and on average, like if you're looking at an 80 millimeter pair, a 20 by 80 should get you to very close to 6 magnitude of gain. So if you're at a NELM 6 site, naked eye limiting magnitude of 6, you should be getting into the 12 range. And a 100 millimeter pair, like a 25 by 100, you should be in the 6.3 to 6.5 range of gain, and therefore you're in the mid 12s. And again, there are some variables like the how dark the sky is, the sky transparency, as well as the experience of the observer, and also how high the object is above the horizon. But typically that's kind of a guide. So I was talking about the advantage of 2-eyed views, and there's something going on with these instruments that's very profound actually, and for those who already have large binoculars, you know what I'm talking about here. But when you look at something like the moon, or especially a larger scale object like M31 and so on, using a DSO example, or M51, there's something going on with the image scale. And I've done some comparisons myself with several of our club members, looking through my binoculars, like a 25 by 100 pair, and then comparing to even a 105 or a 120 millimeter APO. And if you use a comparable magnification and exopupil, you find that the object looks better in the moon, like say the moon as an example, looks better in the binocular, and there's more detail present than when you're looking through a monocular instrument. You almost have to up the power at least 35 to 40 minimum, and sometimes in some cases 50% higher in order to actually get the same perceived image scale. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that our eye-brain system, because we're looking in a very natural way with two eyes, our visual cortex perceives this and gives us a slightly larger perceived image scale, and we can use it to our advantage. Now, on a DSO situation, I'm also finding about a 40%, between 35 and 40% aperture advantage. Remember, we have two optics feeding each eye, so we actually have double the aperture area feeding our eye-brain system. And again, this is kind of the thing we're seeing. So also when you're panning around in a looking for DSOs or even brighter galaxies, as I'm panning around the field of view, at no time do I really have a dead spot where my averted vision doesn't come to play at some point. So whether I have both eyes giving me averted vision advantages or just one, you're still seeing a lot more than you would with just a single eye. So again, there's something really going on here, and it's quite amazing. These are kind of the criteria you'd want to have for larger binoculars. I mentioned about the 3 to 5 millimeter is quite a nominal exopupil, unless you get a binocular telescope where you may want to employ maybe a smaller exopupil for looking at a planet or so on. 16 to 22 is ideal for for eye relief. One thing I want to mention here that's very important is the individual focus. There are a lot of manufacturers that offer both a bridge and individual focus, especially in the straight through pairs. If you can get an individual focus, I definitely recommend it because you can tune the view to each eye. And when you're doing this kind of observational astronomy, and normally I would cover it in a little bit more detail than I am today because of time constraints, but you actually have to tune these to your eyes to get the full effect of it, both the interpupillary distance and the critical focus. If you do that kind of thing, this is a true extension of your eyes, and it's amazing. It's like getting a set of, for those of you that do wear corrective lenses, it's like getting a really good set of corrective lenses. You can read everything. Well, it's the same thing when you're looking at the night sky. You know, these are extending the capabilities of your eyes very profoundly. Okay, so hang on a sec here. So this is, I want to go back one, sorry, there. So this is an example of some of the big binocular systems that I've employed in the past. I've got a 25 by 100 individual focus overwork pair on a fork mount with a tripod there, and you can see, in this case, I was looking midsummer at Jupiter in the daytime, and with polarizing filters on the back end. And then I was going to look at Venus, which was between Jupiter and the sun at the time. This is a couple of years ago. And then I was going to throw on, I ended up doing some solar observing after that. This is my APM 82 millimeter that I mentioned before. I'm running twin solar filters there, and I'm running about somewhere in the 33 power range. A lot of detail to be had on the sun if you have decent vision. This is me at nighttime doing the same thing, or it was dusk actually, just near sunset. I was waiting for the sky to darken so I could watch a first quarter moon start to go through a star cluster, kind of neat. One of the best binocular mounts that I've come across so far for straight through mainly and coral prism binoculars is the Overwork PM2. This is not an inexpensive mount by any stretch, but it's one of the smoothest and most functional mounts that I've ever used. It'll run you about $1,000 Canadian, but there are less expensive alternatives, such as the universal binocular mount that I mentioned earlier by Farpoint. You can get them from several dealers. That's about 400 to 500 Canadian, depending on the pricing schedule at the time, and you may be able to get them used at less than that. The Paragon HD and the Monster binocular mount from Orion also runs in that price range as well. Not 1,000, I mean 400 to 500-ish. For those of you that are do-it-yourselfers, you might, you may decide to, you come up with a new project maybe for the winter. If you're good with wood and metalworking as well, this might be another way to go. These come in two bags, and of course I can take these two and a large case, and I'm out observing and setting up in like less than 5 minutes. A lot of fun to be had. So again, there's a lot of advantages and a lot of capabilities with these instruments, and frankly, to do a proper job, I almost need double the time window. Where can you get these? Well, one example here is with the straight through styles. This is by no means a comprehensive list. There's too many manufacturers globally to even go through the whole list, but most of you are familiar with the big three up top. Nikon and Fujinon are known for their high-end 70mm class binos. They fetch a high-end price too, you know, bordering on $2,000, between $1,500 and $2,000. The Fuji 16x70 is considered one of the gold standards to compare a lot of other astro binos in that category against APM and Lunt. APM makes the Lunt high-end binos as well, and those give the Fujis a good run for their money. I've looked through both, and I actually prefer the APM. It's kind of splitting hairs, but you pay about anywhere from half to 2/3 the price. So they are definitely a solid contender. Oberwerk as well. I've been a long-standing Oberwerk fan for many years, and that's all they do is binoculars. Going to unibody bino telescopes, Oberwerk also offers some of those. APM makes some fantastic ones. I'm going to be getting my 82mm bino telescope that I showed earlier is an APM ED-APO. I'm going to be getting a 120 in the spring, and I'm hoping to get that in time for Messier hunting season. That should be a lot of fun. Vixen is a well-known Japanese manufacturer that makes a wide range of astronomical instruments. They also start at 70mm and up for bino telescopes, and there are a few more as well. And if you find one that you're interested in, I've got my email address at the end of this talk, and please feel free to ask me about them. If I don't know, I'll try to find out for you if it's something that I don't know. I just wanted to quickly mention Oberwerk quickly because a lot of people may not be aware of this, but if you use a gift coupon when ordering from Oberwerk, you get 5% off by utilizing this code. And this is a deal that I arranged with Kevin Bussero, who has been I've been a long-standing customer of his for almost 2 decades. And I asked him to set this up for us. So at least it's the GST. So those of you that, especially in Toronto, you can hop across the border. Maybe you have friends or family members that you could pick them up there, or maybe even do a long weekend to Ohio. I don't know if that's a short trip or not, but it's certainly a longer trip for me. So you might be able to avail yourselves of that advantage of free shipping within the US. I just want to mention quickly here, three pairs. I'm not going to get into a ton of details here, but you'll notice all three of these are threaded for astrofilters. The 82mm binocular telescope obviously fetches, you know, a pretty significant price. You're looking at $1,900 to $2,000, and that's quite typical in the $1,800 to $1,900 range for an instrument like this. So obviously not everybody has deep pockets there, but if you look at say the one on the far right, I've actually owned that one, the 25x100 IF, and that is a fantastic instrument. That was my first big bino just over 7 years ago, and I'm telling you what, I had so much fun with that. A buddy of mine decided to buy them off me, and he's been using it almost exclusively for 2.5 years. He has a C8 that he uses too, but he finds the binos just so much fun and so easy to set up and use that, you know, for $600, that's a pretty serious amount of bang for your astro buck. The fact that they're threaded for astrofilters is the Deluxe and Ultra have 1.25" astrofilter threads on the oculars. So now imagine all the stuff that I've talked about prior to this. Now you add on polarizers for daytime and dawn-dusk viewing, or you add on a nebula filter and now start to get serious into DSO hunting. And it adds a whole new dimension to binocular astronomy that most people haven't even thought of. So this is the kind of fun and utility I'm talking about here with these types of instruments. Just quickly, a couple of cool accessories that you can get, and I recommend certainly if you're 80mm and above, a red dot reticle finder like you would use on a telescope. You can get a lot of these accessories on eBay and other sources as well. This one on the lower central part there is basically designed for fitting on the rail of the straight through pairs. And on eBay, I think you can pay about $20 or so. It's a barrel mounted Picatinny gun sight. So that's one of the few advantages with having the gun culture in the US. We're able to avail ourselves of interesting accessories for non-violent means. Digital inclinometer. This came in really handy today when I was looking at the Mercury moon occultation, because I was using an Altaz panhead, heavy duty one, of course, with my 25x100s. And by being able to tell, you know, look up where Mercury is in the sky, it still took a little bit of doing, mind you, because we had some contrails and other things interfering with the fun. but certainly it gets you in the neighborhood, and it makes it really easy to find planets quickly. It doubles as a Dobbin clinometer, and you can use it also to be a little bit more accurate than the analog scales on your gem mount as well. So a lot of fun to be had with some of these accessories. I mentioned solar observing. I prefer the Bader myself over a Glass or Seymour or some of the other ones. You could build your own if you decide to get a large pair and you want to, and you're pretty handy. A lot of fun to be had there. Or even Kendrick in Ontario sells some low profile ones that fit binoculars very well as well. With a binocular telescope, of course, you're going to definitely need pairs of oculars. So just be mindful of that down the road. That will add a little bit of money as well. And of course, two eyepiece filters, whether you get polarizers and or nebula filters, that will add a little bit, but these are nice to have, especially to expand the capabilities of your instrument. One final thing before I close is I just wanted to mention that there's a UK website called binocularsky.com. A good friend of mine that I've known for many years, Stephen Tonkin, you may have heard of him. He's published a couple of books on binocular astronomy, and he's done outreach in the United Kingdom for many years. Primarily focus was on binocular observing. And he has a free monthly website that you can log into that and click in and get onto the email circular, and therefore you'll get a monthly up-to-date object list. And in some cases, it's even broken down by aperture as well, depending on what's available at the time. A lot of fun to be had there if you're looking for binocular targets. So in closing, I'll ask you folks again, what kind of observer would you like to be? These poor sots here who are having to, and again, I told you I'm going to beat up telescopes. This poor lady here, I mean, she could sit on a chair with a table, but is she praying to the sky gods here? I can't imagine what the heck's going on there. And look at this poor guy. He's waiting for dusk, and he has to try and polar align. And not that it's overly hard once you know what you're doing, but especially as a new observer, it can be quite daunting still. Or do you want to be these cool guys? I mean, it doesn't matter what time of day, these instruments are ready to go, and you can have tons of fun. And if I had posted this at the beginning of the talk for 10 minutes, and then do Q&A, it probably would have been better than this talk tonight. But this is it in a nutshell on the right side. So whether you decide to do, stick with your handhelds, and I have over half a dozen pairs that I still use very regularly, and they're fantastic instruments. Or maybe tonight you kind of went, gee, Darren, this is kind of cool stuff here. I think I would like to check out these larger binoculars. You'll definitely double your fun under the stars using binoculars as a rule, and prepare to be amazed if you crank it up a notch with these larger pairs. Thank you very much. This is my email for those of you that don't have time to ask questions tonight. Feel free to send them to me, and I'll send an anthology to Andrew and Paul so that they can share them with the group. Do we have time for questions?
Yes, we do, certainly. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Darren. That was a very informative presentation. And also, we haven't had a binocular presentation in a long time. So thank you so much for bringing some focus back to these excellent instruments, especially now that wintertime's coming. They're great for grab and go. Peak. All right, so Emma, any questions for Darren?
We have one question. Lewis wants to know, could you use a shoulder mount like a Steadicam?
Can you use a shoulder mount like as in a Steadicam? Is this for a large bino they're talking about? I have heard of one or two people using them, but I don't think it depends on the size of the instrument. I think a 16 or 15 by 70 pair you probably could, but anything larger than that, I think it's going to start to get a little heavier, unless you're looking at a heavy duty one that you would use for like a much more heavy video camera mount. My recommendation though is to avoid doing a shoulder mount at all, because then you're still moving and amplifying your motions. It's better to have them fixed on the ground, stabilized.
Thank you. That's all of our questions.
That was it. Wow.
Darren, I have a question for you. Bushnell is a very popular brand. Are they any good?
Sorry, say that again.
Bushnell is a very popular brand.
Okay, well, I'm probably going to create some enemies here, but I would say in anything sub $300 in the Bushnell, I think has some questionable. Anything over that, I think they may be pretty good. But the problem is with a lot of these larger companies that mass produce optics, their quality control can be highly variable. even Celestron as an example. And I mean, they make great telescopes, but you can get everything from a fantastic instrument to a lousy instrument and everywhere in between. And you can imagine if they're doing 10,000 of these on a, every 2 weeks, they may only grab one 1/100th of them off the line to test. Well, how many, if it turns out that the person that's producing them those days was a little tired, or they ran out of parts and they had to substitute something. Not that it happens all the time, but it is the reality. Not to mention the fact that sometimes if you go to a place like Canadian Tire or Walmart, if you look for binoculars as an example, if you buy a pair and then somebody returns them, and then you get their pair that's gone through 3 hands, they're just going to put them back on the shelf. So you may be gambling with quality, and it's not even fair to the manufacturer. But who knows what the history of that instrument is, right? They could have banged it really hard and knocked it out of collimation. So that's sort of my long answer. I hope that helps. Okay. Generally, I don't think the Bushnell is an ideal high-end instrument. That would be my answer.
Mm-hmm. Good. Thank you for the feedback. If there are no more questions, then thanks again, Darren. Great to have you present to the Toronto Centre. Maybe we'll have you back in the future for a follow-on or a more detailed, in-depth presentation.
It's been a true pleasure. Thank you, Paul. And for those of you that did see my email there, feel free to email, and I'll send Paul the, anonymously, the questions and answers if there is anybody that has any. Oh, looks like we have another one here. Hang on. Go ahead, Betty.
Well, I can see.
Oh, Ron McNaughton had a question. His question was, I figure a 70mm binoculars would have about the same total area of aperture, and a single 100mm telescope. How would the view into both eyes compare to the larger telescope into the eye?
Okay, well, as I mentioned, again, you're looking at a telescope under wide field. If you're using a 70mm, let's just use something like a 15 by 70. Typically, you would have to go somewhere around 25 to 30 power, well, say 25, in a 100mm instrument to get the same relative image scale that you would get in a 70mm pair. When I look in a dark sight, because I have, yeah, you're right, there's double the area. So typically, if all things being equal, if it's a high quality pair, you'll definitely get kind of close to that 100mm regime if you were to employ the same magnification. Okay, that's very important because obviously I can dig deeper with a 100mm telescope at moderate to high powers in the sky than I would with a binocular. So just be careful about that. So for when you're comparing these things, the idea here is I'm employing the same magnification with the same instruments in order to get extra people technically to get the same kind of comparison. Okay. And if Mr. McNaughton wants to send me an email, I can give him the math just to help him out on that too. But yes, that's correct.
There was one more question which came in from Eric Briggs. He asked, did we cover image stabilized binos?
I did not, but image stabilized binos, I'm assuming the handheld types like the Canons and Nikons and so on, those are smaller than the 70mm, and there's a reason why there are some high-end military binoculars that I didn't want to cover today that may be image stabilized, like for on ships and so on. But I do have another talk on image stabilized and an advanced binocular talk that maybe I'll give at a future time here, Paul, and we can cover that in more detail.
Yes, please.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thanks again, Darren. Let's move on to our next speaker. Brian Day will tell us about NASA's solar system treks. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you very much. Well, once again, I'm Brian Day. I'm from NASA's Solar System Exploration Research Virtual Institute. Way too long a name, but that's NASA Ames Research Center in California. And I want to thank you all for having me tonight. I'm going to talk about a project that I'm very pleased to be working on. It is the NASA Solar System Treks portals. And this is a set of data visualization and analysis portals that are web-based. They're online. They work in your browser. You don't buy anything. You don't install anything. You just point your browser to trek.nasa.gov. And this is a set of tools that are used for planetary science, for mission planning, and for education and outreach. We have a range of portals that cover a number of planetary bodies, including planets, moons, asteroids, and it's a growing list. But what these allow you to do is view the surfaces of many different worlds as seen through the eyes of many different instruments aboard many different spacecraft. I'll start out with our lunar portal, that is the Moontrek portal. Now you can get to all of our portals through that main website, trek.nasa.gov. The Moontrek portal is currently being used to support mission planning for our upcoming missions to the surface of the moon. It provides thousands, literally thousands, of different data products from different instruments that are georeferenced and co-registered so that you can view the surface of the moon in many different ways. Like any good GIS system, you can pan and zoom. Here we'll zoom in to the crater Tycho. And of course, one of the things you might want to know first about Tycho is, well, how big is it? Fortunately, we have a number of tools that are available to you to help you analyze what you're seeing. We will start out with the calculate distance tool here, highlighted up top. I'm also going to call your attention real quick. At the very bottom, it says, are you a scientist? What you're seeing here in the list of tools are our general tools that are available to anyone. But for researchers and mission planners, you can register for an account and get access to our high-end tools for actual surface operations planning. But right now, let's take a look at distance measurement. This is available to anyone, and measuring the size of the Tycho crater is as simple as drawing a line across it, and it'll come back and let you know that here we're looking at something in excess of 85 kilometers across. Similarly, you might want to know how deep is it. Our elevation profile tool, again, allows you to draw a line across the crater here, and you can see that you get a nice elevation profile. So you can measure the heights of mountains, the depths of craters and valleys. Comes in very handy. You can also draw a bounding box around any terrain you want and have the portal generate for you an STL or OBJ file that you can then send to your 3D printer and make 3D prints of any part of the lunar surface you want. Another really fun aspect is the ability to draw a path with your mouse anywhere across the surface of the moon. The portal will then return to you a QR code that you can scan into your smartphone. Put your smartphone in a pair of cheap, $5, $10 Google Cardboard compatible goggles, and whatever path you drew, you will now fly in virtual reality. That's a lot of fun. We have different projections available within the Moontrek portal. So there's an equirectangular projection. There's both north and south polar projections. And then there's also a 3D globe projection that allows you to interactively fly across the surface of the moon using your standard keyboard game controls and mouse. So here we'll fly down into Tycho crater and actually go roving across the floor of the crater. Now, as I mentioned, we have these very different views that are available. So let's take a look at an example. We'll go here to the Marius Hills on the moon, one of the most spectacular collections of volcanic peaks on the moon. But as seen here through the LROC wide-angle camera, an excellent camera, it just really doesn't look all that spectacular. You know, there are great volcanoes here, but they're not showing up due to the nature of lunar volcanoes tending to have very small slopes. But if we switch our view now to a laser altimetry view, you'll see how those volcanic peaks suddenly just jump right out. They become very, very evident. Now we can load another view. We'll go and grab a gravity map view. This is from the Kaguya spacecraft. And we're looking at the exact same area, but with a very different view. Here we're seeing variations in gravity. We're seeing blue representing low, red representing high. And you can just keep grabbing these different views through different instruments and essentially create a stack of different images. For each data product in your stack, you can do a number of things, including download that data product. But one of my favorite things is you can adjust their order in a stack, and you can adjust transparency between layers. This allows you to blend different data products. So here we are blending that laser altimetry view with the gravity map view. And by doing so, we're able to visualize both the surface morphology of the volcanic field, as well as through the coloration, visualize the now solidified unerupted plug of magma beneath the volcanic field. This is really, really neat. Now, we'll turn our attention to a south polar projection and look at the south pole of the moon. There's a lot of interest in the south pole of the moon right now. And through, again, the LROC camera aboard the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, we see an area that is very intensely shadowed because the sunlight is coming in essentially horizontally. And parts of these shadows are actually permanent. But with all this shadowing, it of course makes any kind of planning of activities very difficult. But again, if we switch our view to a laser altimetry view, we can pierce those shadows. And we can see the floors of these craters that were previously obscured to us. We can also switch to a slope map view. Coloring blue here is relatively flat. Again, red would be somewhat dangerous, would be definitely dangerous to try and drive a rover down. We can overlay those areas of permanent shadow, areas where the sunlight hasn't shone in oftentimes over 1 billion years. These areas are consequently very, very cold. These are among the coldest areas we have measured anywhere in the solar system, getting down around 40 Kelvin. And consequently, these are areas where you may have deposits of water ice that are potentially available to us as a resource. Similarly, in our hunt for the resource of water ice, we might want to take a look at a temperature map. So here, using the Diviner instrument aboard LRO, we're looking at an average temperature or looking at maximum temperatures. Again, good for isolating where to look for potential deposits of ice. We can also use the LAMP instrument aboard LRO to look for potential deposits of surface frost. And we can use neutron spectrometry to look for concentrations of hydrogen, which again could give us clues as to the presence of water. Using thermal modeling, we can map ice stability at depth. How far would you have to dig down beneath the surface to get to a temperature where ice could remain stable? And in some of those permanently shadowed areas, you don't have to dig at all. Ice can remain stable right there at the surface. So these are the kinds of things, the kinds of investigations you can do looking at the area of the South Pole, which is going to have a great deal of activity in the very short term, in the upcoming years. We can also take advantage of the high resolution of the narrow angle camera, and we can zoom in to the rim of Shackleton, getting down to sub-meter resolution. Now, as I mentioned, there are a number of other portals. And so let's do a quick tour of the solar system using the solar system treks. We do have the Mars Trek portal. And here you see the planet Mars as it would look if you were looking out the window of an orbiting spacecraft. Mars is, of course, a complete desert today. There's no liquid water found anywhere on the surface. But if we change our view to, again, a laser altimetry view, and we color code that laser altimetry view so that blue represents the low altitudes, red represents the high, we can see clear evidence of Mars's watery past. We can see ancient river channels flowing into what was once a large bay that then opened up into a great northern ocean on Mars, well over 3 billion years ago. Speaking of Mars's watery past, we can zoom into Jezero crater, where currently the Perseverance rover is beginning its exploration. So you can see the Jezero crater is marked in the center here and the landing site. Let's zoom down into it. With a closer view here, we see inlet channels where water flowed into Jezero, which was once a great crater lake. We see inflow channel on the west and coming in from the north. And then on the east, we can see an outflow channel where the lake actually overflowed. Continuing our zoom in, the landing site we can see is actually just to the southeast of a great delta deposit, where that inflow channel coming in from the west deposited a great deal of mud, sand, and gravel on the floor of the crater lake. That's an area that we really want to explore. Zooming in more closely to the landing site, we see it is right next to a field of sand dunes, and the spacecraft was smart enough to avoid landing in those sand dunes. Zooming in closer, and now we'll turn our field of view from the landing site looking out toward the wall of the delta deposit. And in the background, the mountains you see are the actual crater rim of Jezero crater. We can advance forward to the face of the delta deposit that the rover is going to examine, and we can see the layered stratigraphy of the sedimentary deposits in the delta deposit, in the great delta deposit here. And we can go examine the breach in the crater wall through which water flowed in through that western inflow channel. We can go examine outside of the crater the actual riverbed of that western inflow channel. Of course, there are other areas on Mars that are well worth investigating. Valles Marineris is an incredibly spectacular feature, and along much of its length, it is adorned by gigantic landslides, such as Ius Labes here. We can see that, like the Grand Canyon here on Earth, it is actually a network of smaller features with a great deal of detail. And again, going into the 3D globe mode and interactive, we can fly down into Valles Marineris, examining the sedimentary deposits at the bottom of ancient paleo lake beds laid down when this was once filled with water. And then we can zoom up the 8,000 meter face of the northern wall. Very spectacular. Another area of great interest are the Cerberus fossae. And these are great rifts in the crust of Mars, and the Mars InSight probe with its seismometer has now detected that this is an area of active seismic activity. Mars quakes are being generated here. And you can see these magnificent rifts where the crust of Mars is actually being pulled apart. In addition, in the Cerberus fossae, you have the Cerberus fossae mantling unit. And this is the apparent youngest, most recent area of volcanic activity on Mars. Now, on Mars, we see volcanoes that are billions of years old to hundreds of millions of years old. But here at the Cerberus fossae mantling unit, we are seeing an area that had volcanic activity that would be measured in less than 1 million years. We're looking at thousands of years. This is a really incredible area of study. Also across the surface of Mars, while we see impact craters, we also see a different class of holes in the ground. We see these pits. These are apparent skylights, areas where roofs have collapsed above subterranean lava tubes, great caverns where liquid lava was once flowing. Now, while there's no liquid water flowing on the surface of Mars now, we have some hints that perhaps there may still be liquid water flowing beneath the surface. So lava tubes such as this could be very fascinating places to look. They are also shielded by the native rock around them. They're shielded from radiation, from thermal extremes, from meteorite impacts. So some people think that these could be good habitats for us in the future when we live and work on Mars. And they could also be good places to look for perhaps past or even existent life on Mars today. Now, when we send humans to live and work on Mars, they're going to need water. There is, of course, abundant water at the poles and the polar ice caps, but we don't want to send our astronauts there. It's a very, very harsh environment. But fortunately, as this map available in Mars Trek shows, there are bands of mid-latitude glaciers on Mars. Much more habitable environment, and again, with water ice available. So let's take a look at one of those mid-latitude glaciers. This takes the form of a valley glacier. The glaciers are all debris covered. They're coated with dirt and dust, so they don't stand out as brilliant white. They're covered in that ubiquitous Martian dust. But here you can see clear signs of flow in a valley glacier. Here's another close-up view of a valley glacier, and you can see medial moraines, you can see flow features. This looks very much like glaciers you may have seen here on Earth. Another example here, you see this toe of ice sticking out from between the mountains here. On Earth, we would call this a Piedmont glacier. We can zoom in closer to that toe sticking out there, and you can see again lines of flow going across it. Another type of glacier that is very common are these lobate debris apron glaciers that frequently form around mountain peaks. They form lenticular shapes. You can see a number of glacial ridges, and you can even see a Bergschrund crevasse where the ice has pulled away from the face of the mountain. We also find concentric fill glaciers where glacial ice can fill large craters. And we see wonderful stories. Here we see an example of what's called a rampart crater. Now, oftentimes when you look at Mars or the moon, craters will be surrounded by ejecta blankets of hot, dry, pulverized rock that have been thrown out. But in some cases, like this, you see an ejecta blanket that is very thick and pasty. It almost looks like you're looking at where a rock got thrown into a mud puddle. And that's pretty much what happened. This was an impact that happened in an area rich of subsurface ice. And so you got this thick, pasty ejecta blanket around it. If you look carefully, coming out from the top, you will see some dark fluvial features where water actually then flowed out across the surface. And then, subsequent to all of that, you have one of those lobate debris apron glaciers that has advanced across the landscape, and you can tell the glacier itself is younger than the impact because the glacier is actually overriding part of that ejecta blanket. We talked about the great northern ocean that Mars once had well over 3 billion years ago. We can see evidence for this in the laser altimetry, but some of my favorite evidence for this comes actually not within the body of the ocean itself, but inland from the ocean. Now, again, this ocean was in place in the early part of the solar system when there were a lot of meteoroid and asteroid bombardments going on. And those bombardments, when they would hit the ocean, would cause gigantic tsunamis, hundreds of meters tall or even more, rushing inland. And to this day, inland, we can see the chaotic thumbprint pattern of turbulent scarring on the surface there as the water flowed over the inland surface. And then we can see backflow channels where the water rushed back out across the land back toward the ocean basin. Moving on to Mercury, we have our Mercury Trek portal. We can visualize Mercury's largest impact basin, the Horos basin. And fascinatingly, directly opposite on the globe, we have this area that has been labeled weird terrain, very jumbled, broken terrain. And this was formed by the shock wave expanding out from the Horos basin, going all the way around the planet and refocusing on the far side, antipodal to the impact basin. And where that shock wave all came together, it disrupted the ground in a very spectacular way. We see impact craters all across Mercury, but we also see irregularly shaped craters, sometimes surrounded by ash deposits. These are pyroclastic volcanic vents, areas of volcanic activity on Mercury. And they're actually quite common. In a number of the impact craters, we see bright crater floor deposits, also called hollows, where volatile minerals have been turned to gas by the intense heat of Mercury. Ceres was discussed by both of our speakers tonight, previous to me, and we have our Ceres Trek portal. Here we're zooming in to Ahuna Mons, a cryovolcano on Ceres, standing about 4,000 meters tall. Volcanism on Ceres is a bit different. The role of magma is taken by briny ice water beneath the crust. We also have ancient cryovolcanoes that over time, the temperature and gravity environment of Ceres causes them to slump down into low-lying pancakes. But again, with the elevation profiling tool, you can explore these features in detail. Another example of volcanism and cryovolcanism on Ceres comes in Akator Crater with the faculae that are actually salt deposits. The salty water erupted, the actual water ice then volatilized into space and left the salt behind in these brilliant white deposits. And at features such as the Samhain-Kitani, we see an area above, apparently a rising mantle plume that rises up, strikes the floor of the crust, and spreads out. As it spreads, it drags the crust and fractures it and these extensional cracks. Vesta, we have a portal for that. Vesta at one time was a nice, perfectly spherical object, but doesn't look like that today. The top of it still looks fairly round, but if you look at the bottom here, it almost looks like some of it is missing. And that's because that's exactly the case. In this laser altimetry view, we can see the Rheas Sylvia impact basin, a giant impact basin, where a smaller asteroid hit Vesta and nearly destroyed it. Rheas Sylvia is about 1 billion years old. We can see Rheas Sylvia overlies a similarly sized, more ancient basin, the Venenia Basin, about 2 billion years old. And so these two impacts almost destroyed Vesta and left it the peculiar shape that it has today. The central peak within the Rheas Sylvia crater is actually one of the more impressive mountains in the solar system. It stands 21 kilometers tall, rivaling Olympus Mons. But for a very small world, this is a very huge mountain indeed. Looking across the equator of Vesta, we see these circumferential fractures, such as the Devalia fossae. And these are arranged circumferentially around the Rheas Sylvia basin, showing how close the asteroid came to complete destruction. We also see areas of pitted terrain that show us where there were deposits of ice beneath the surface that then were heated by nearby meteoroid impacts and volatilized, turned into gas that expanded and erupted, forming these fields of rimless pits. Continuing with our exploration of asteroids, we have the Bennu Trek portal, visiting the near-Earth asteroid Bennu, which was the subject of exploration by the OSIRIS-REx mission this past year. We can actually zoom down to Nightingale Crater, where OSIRIS-REx gathered its surface samples. And we can even see strange boulders standing out. These are exogenous basalt. And from their spectral signature, these are actually fragments of Vesta that have landed on the surface of Bennu. We also have the Ryugu Trek portal, another near-Earth asteroid, another rubble pile. This was visited recently by Japan's Hayabusa 2 mission, and this past year it returned samples from the surface of Ryugu. And you can examine data from the Hayabusa 2 mission in detail with the Ryugu Trek portal. The Titan Trek portal takes you to Saturn's largest moon, and you can peer down through the dense, cloudy atmosphere of Titan to see chains of islands in the lakes and seas of liquid hydrocarbons, ethane and methane. Very, very frigid, incredibly spectacular terrain on Titan. The Icy Moon Treks examine 7 of Saturn's other small icy moons. These are Dione, Enceladus, Iapetus, Mimas, Phoebe, Rhea, and Tethys. We just recently released the Venus Trek portal. This is very exciting to us because we are now planning some upcoming missions to Venus. It's high time for a return. And so here, using radar data, we are piercing the thick atmosphere of Venus to view Artemis Corona, a giant complex of volcanic activity. And we've also recently released the Europa Trek portal for Jupiter's moon Europa. Again, the topic of upcoming exploration from the European Space Agency and from NASA. Here you can see the chaotic terrain and the ridges of the global ice cap that overlies an ocean of liquid water estimated to have about 2.5 times the volume of all of Earth's oceans combined. We can only wonder what might be swimming in that ocean. So with that, I'll close. I want to thank you. I also want to tip my hat to the wonderful team I have down at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, the great engineers that have put this together. We're continuing to expand the portal. I invite you to join us at trek.nasa.gov and explore the solar system with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian, for an excellent presentation. Lots of interesting things to explore, especially in our upcoming winter here, where we'll have nothing but clouds until about March or so. So thanks again. Emma, do we have any questions for Brian?
No, there's no questions for Brian at the moment. Thank you so much.
No questions. All right. Very good. Thank you, Brian, once more. And that wraps up our speakers for the evening. Next up is Tom Luton with the announcements for tonight.
Thank you very much, Paul. Good evening, everyone, and hope you're doing well. Hope you had a nice Halloween. And so let's get started. So as Paul was talking about earlier, we've got two types of meetings. We've just had one of our recreational astronomy nights, and in 2 weeks, we're going to have one of our speakers nights. All of these meetings are here live on YouTube, and as Paul said earlier, please introduce yourself. Say hi in the chat, enter some questions for our presenters. If you're a new member, please introduce yourself, and if you're from somewhere far away, please let us know where you're from. So coming up in 2 weeks is our speakers night and as well our annual meeting. Our speaker is going to be William Morin, who will be discussing the geography that guides us and indigenous perspectives on our relationship to the stars, right here live on YouTube. And then immediately following will be the 2021 annual meeting of the Toronto Centre. So invitations were emailed out a couple of weeks ago. The agenda, last year's minutes, the meeting minutes, and the slate of council candidates have been posted on our website. You must register for the annual meeting, and you have to do so no later than 12 midnight on the 15th of November. And please register to attend. We require 25 members to attend this meeting so we can have quorum, so we can legally complete this meeting. If you didn't receive an invitation and you are a member of good standing, please contact me at president@raskto.ca. This is also the last call for nominations. If you would like to join council, nominations are accepted until midnight tonight. So you've got another 2 3/4 hours. If you'd like to join us on council, you must be a member in good standing, and the nomination form requires the signature of 2 additional members of the Toronto Centre, also in good standing. Please email your nomination to our secretary@raskto.ca. You've got less than 3 hours. Our next recreational astronomy night is on the 1st of December, 7:30 here on YouTube. Andy Beaton will be discussing the sky this month. Reza Mohammed will be talking about how I stack and process my astro images. And we still have one more additional presentation slot. So if you would like to present something, please drop a line to Paul Markov. This is where I plug our observing certificates. If you had a chance to take advantage of some of the skies we've had in the last few weeks and months, and you've worked your way up to finishing one of our many certificates, please let us know. If you haven't and are interested, we've got an Explore the Universe certificate. We've got Explore the Moon using binoculars or telescopes, the Messier catalog, the finest new general catalog objects. We've got double stars, the Isabel Williamson Lunar Certificate, Deep Sky Gems, and Deep Sky Challenge. Full details at www.rask.ca/certificate-programs. Brief shout out about our education and public outreach activities. We have had virtual star parties and EPO talks with the Science Center, and also events happened this last summer with the Millennium Square. We've had ongoing at the David Dunlop Observatory, and we've done work with St. Clair O'Connor community, the Dunlap Institute, with Brownies, Cubs, Scouts, and school groups, and also with NOVA, our new observers of visual astronomy. If you're interested in having EPO give a talk to any such group, please contact public education at rasto.ca. Our observing sessions are still suspended until further notice due to the pandemic. Our sessions at Bayview Village Park, the Long Sault Conservation Area, and the Ontario Science Center. The Carr Astronomical Observatory is open. However, the snow has started to fall. We checked the camera this afternoon. There's about 2 inches of snow on the ground. But at the moment, the driveway is the gravel driveway is warm enough that it is melting the snow. But I would not trek up that way unless I already had my snow tires on. Access to the CAO facilities is for members with their families only in a non-communal fashion. Total site occupancy limited to 10 bookings up to 25 individuals. At the moment, we've got it limited to 1 member per family upstairs in the house, and the rest for members and families bookings for day use or staying in independent campers or RVs or tents. That's going to change in the next little while. We're going to have additional people being able to stay downstairs, but again, that's some point in the future. The Sue Laura Observatory is open. The Jeff Brown Observatory is still closed. Full details are on the website. Please read everything before making your booking. Oh, and vaccination, proof of vaccination is also required in order to make a booking. This is where I get to plug RASC membership. Please renew your membership online or purchase one at secure.rasc.ca. The RASC does have an emergency fund if COVID has knocked you back on a loop for because of things. RASC, it's completely confidential, and we also offer gift memberships. Contact mempub at rasc.ca for more details. And with that, I'd like to wish you all a very good evening. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Please follow us on all the various forms of social media. If you've liked what you've seen here, please like and subscribe and click the notification bell. Be safe, keep looking up, and have a good night. Take care.